Good afternoon, Devin.
Okay, well,
Barely, you're alive. I'm alive. Good afternoon.
What's up, Barry?
There you go. Good afternoon, Marlon. Yeah, you are. Good afternoon, Kyler. Yeah.
I was taking my anger out on you because Trent just punched me.
You still want this right here? Yeah. So slide up in there.
I'll check. I'm gonna get him.
Hey, so slide it. Grab your calculator.
You live like right next to me. It's not wait.
I mean, it's learning that you have to worry about my class. There was no makeup work. Really. Alright. Good afternoon, Jaden. There you go. Good afternoon, Naya. There you go. Good afternoon, Jamie. Good. Good afternoon, Emily. There you go. Who have I missed? Yeah, good afternoon, Taylor. There you go. Come on, guys. We should have our calculators out, bell ringer going. This should be an easy one that we don't take long on. And you need to ask this question before we have an understanding check today. It's an understanding check is what I've always said we're going to have. Test isn't until Monday. Tuesday.
Yeah.
Understanding check today. Come on. By the way, if you're struggling to answer this question, it might be a good idea, I don't know, to get out your notebook or your notes and look through those to see what you need to ask questions about. Well, then look through it, see if there's something, because as slow as we're moving on most of these things, we got some questions we need to be asking. Thomas, did you forget something when you came in?
Oh.
Can you hand your phone to Kyler tomorrow and ask him to put it up? No Ethan today.
You see.
Is Aiden not here? No. Jaden, did you forget something? No, is your phone broken? Your mama took it. Brooklyn, you're still broken. Tomorrowland, there was something wrong with your phone, wasn't there? Jordan, did you forget something, my man? Was something wrong with your phone? Or did you just forget to put it up? No Keandre today?
Oh, that's that one.
Trent, no phone? No phone? Come on then. Come on, Trent. I'll tell Coach.
Oh, we're on that.
No, dude, we don't show up 3 minutes late. Let's go. In my class, if you come in and do the bell ringer and get done before we start, then I'll let you use the restroom. So it's on time. Thank you, sir. Keandre, don't forget. Thank you. Okay. Y'all need to type that question faster. Okay. Well, then you don't understand it well enough. Then you don't understand as well as you think you do, and you need to spend more time studying. Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to come apart. We have, oh no, that's 20. Okay, just kidding. It's 10 and 10. 21 to 25, we need to get our answers. Okay, so we got several who say they don't have one. How to find standard deviation, we'll talk about that again briefly. How to put, okay guys, if you say how to put it in the calculator, what is it? Do you know, Naya, do you know what it is?
How to put the equation?
When it says how to put it in the calculator, do you know what it is? Huh? No, I'm just asking, do you know what it is? No? Not Jordan. Jaden, do you know what it is? No? Guys, don't use those words like it. It means nothing to people who are outside your brain, okay? So be clear with your language. How to do box and whisker plots, okay? So we need to talk about that a little bit. Don't fully understand everything. Okay. Okay, so standard deviation, sum of histogram, easier way to find the standard deviation. I don't know that there is an easier way. I know that some of us are still typing. I'm going to put a pause. Don't do wild symbols. Like just do simple stuff. Well, I'm hitting stop. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So the biggest things that I saw up here: standard deviation, box plot, or box and whisker plot, same thing. Box plot, and there's something else. Histogram. Okay, so we'll talk about these things. And these are things that you should definitely be asking questions about. So, we're going to take time at the beginning of today, 15 to 20 minutes, to talk about comparing distributions. I'm also, please hear me very clearly on this, I'm going to show you how to use the calculator quickly. Ezra, sir, I am teaching, I need you to stop me. So, I'm going to teach you how to use the calculators, because here's the thing. What matters most to me is for your ability to analyze the data. In order to earn full credit, right, then you're going to have to do some of the work by hand. But also the calculator can do the work for you, can't it? Okay, so you're allowed to use the calculator. If you get stuck and can't do it by hand, then you can use the calculator, you just won't be able to score as high on the rubric. Remember that rubric is your level of evidence of understanding, okay? So you will be able to use technology. So we're going to do the understanding check, not necessarily during the last. We're going to take that 15 minutes or so to look at comparing distributions, answering these questions, and from there, hold your question, Joey. From there, we'll take about 45 minutes to do the understanding check. Question,
Yeah,
Joey.
the only thing I'm worried if I'm going to be able to finish this from checking out early.
Well, then you'll need to come in during enrichment, and I will score what you've done, and you'll have to come in during enrichment and finish it tomorrow. Okay? So don't forget, I will remind you, it's not just about calculating, it's also about interpreting measures of center. Like when we talk about a mean, what is a mean?
Average.
That's a technical term, but what is an average? What does that really mean? It's not just a number. Okay, also remember it's a measure of center, so it is a typical value for that data set. It's a measure of center, it's a typical value. A median is another typical value for that data set. The beauty of the median, though, is what do we automatically know about what's to the left and to the right of that median?
If it's skewed.
The number in the middle?
It is the number in the middle, so what percent of data is on either side? Right. We want to recognize that the median separates the bottom half of data from the top half of data. That's something we want to recognize. Ezra, are you focusing so you can learn this before the understanding check?
Focusing.
Your eyes aren't even up here, dude.
They are.
Okay, so when should we use a mean versus when should we use a median? Okay, so you want to use the median when the data is skewed left or right. Jamie, what was your question?
I was saying that the mean is usually symmetrical.
And then so we would use the mean when the data is symmetrical. Okay, so I will point this out. Let's say you have two different distributions. right? So I've got this one, and I'm comparing it to this one. Which one do you think? Should I use mean or median to compare those two distributions?
Median.
For both?
No, median and
Mean.
See, here's the thing though. Do I want to compare a median to a mean, or do I want to compare a median to a median?
median to median.
So if one of the data, or one set of distribution, one set of data, one distribution is skewed, you have to use median for that. So you would use median for both, because you're trying to compare them. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I mentioned it, but we haven't talked about it heavily. Don't forget, standard deviation. Which measure of center do we use for standard deviation, or with standard deviation?
Median.
I think standard deviation was mean, right? Remember, I'm going to give you the formula, but if you look at standard deviation, it was the value minus the mean squared divided by n minus 1. You need the mean to calculate standard deviation, so mean and standard deviation go together. IQR, does anyone remember what IQR stands for? Right? Interquartile range, that goes with our median. And that's what we need to identify outliers. So we're going to do some quick review with this. Okay? We already talked through most of this. We didn't interpret. I think I asked someone to remind me to talk about interpreting here yesterday, right? Does it sound right? No, I didn't ask y'all to make a note of that. And then someone forgot to make a note of that. Okay, what was the standard deviation for the home team?
It's
22 point...
4.1.
22 point what?
Well, I said 44.1 for home team.
There's no way that's the standard deviation. Like the mean is 68, right?
2.21.
2 point something?
Yes.
2.21.
I think y'all are talking about the sum of the squares, aren't you?
Oh, it's 2.21.
Yeah, 2.21. The sum of the squares, the sum of x sub I minus x bar squared, here was 44 point something. But S was 2.21. Okay? What was the standard deviation for the visiting team?
1.49.
And don't forget there's inches there. And so we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but I'm going to recap it here quickly. What is the definition of standard deviation? Because you need to know that definition in order to be able to
How much
interpret
the
it.
data
Yeah, hold on. Emily had her hand up. Let's respect that. Emily.
This is the measure of how spread out the data is.
Okay, so standard deviation is a measure of how spread out the data is. Does anyone remember the way I defined it though?
How much the data deviates?
Okay, does anyone want to add on to that? Maddie?
The amount of data typically deviates from the mean.
Okay, so don't forget that key word. It is the typical amount. Typical amount. The data, yes, deviates, but deviates from what?
the mean.
Right. That is a critical thing, right? It's not just deviating. It's a typical amount the data deviates specifically from the mean. So, when I look at this 1.49, we're only going to do one right now, but let's interpret that. Start at the beginning. A what? Start at the beginning of the definition.
Oh.
Translate that into
Average.
explaining what the standard deviation is.
Average.
I think
It's a type of average, but remember it's an average of the deviations. So literally look at the definition. It's a what? A
typical amount.
okay, so a typical amount we need to talk about this data here, y'all.
Height.
So a typical amount, whose height? Remember there's more context to it. Okay, so a typical amount, the visiting team's height, what?
Deviate.
I was saying, so hold on, so Joey, hold on what you're saying, because that's a good thing, but remember, what you're saying is a typical amount of the visiting team's height is 1.49 inches, like, so Joey, what did you say?
Deviate.
Right, a typical amount the visiting team's height deviates.
From the data.
What
From the mean.
deviates from the mean of 68 inches is, notice, a typical amount the visiting team's height deviates from the mean is 1.49 inches. There's other ways that you can say that. The visiting team's height deviates from the mean of 68 inches typically by 1.49 inches, right? There's lots of different ways to say it, but we need to be careful and make sure that it's clear that a typical amount of deviation from the mean is blank. That's how you would want to interpret this. And so be careful, don't forget, Emily, like, yes, standard deviation is a measure of how spread out the data is, but the standard deviation is a typical amount the data deviates from the mean. All right? Ezra. Ezra. Okay. What are your questions? What I will say is, for those of y'all who are asking for an easy way to do standard deviation, other than a calculator, the only way to make it easier is to make that table. X sub I, those are the values, the value minus the mean, and finally, the value minus the mean squared. You make that table to get this sum, divide it by n minus 1, then you take the square root. That's the only way that I can make it easier. Well, I mean, if I ask you for standard deviation, what does standard deviation start with? S. Which is why we use S for standard deviation. Okay? What's the symbol for mean? X bar is mean, right? Those are the two main ones. N, remember, is just the number of values or number of data values. It's how many numbers there were. Other than that, I think that's it. That's the value of the individual thing. But also sometimes you just have to study and make sure you know what those symbols are. We're going to talk through a couple more symbols in a second. So let's look at lesson 3, because we're going to talk about how to use technology a little bit. I'm going to skip this right now. Okay, so we have the same exact objectives for this lesson 3. In fact, this lesson 3 is just practice comparing these two students. So here's what I want y'all to do at this point. Pick up the calculator, and we're going to actually go through the work of typing all of these values into the calculator. Okay? We talked about this a little bit yesterday. For my copy of this. Hold on. All right. So, when you open up the calculator, alright, let's just say I go to the home button, okay? So I'm here at home. Where do I need to go now to be able to create a document?
Spreadsheet.
Do notice it's not just calculate. We want to go to documents, and you can go to new. Now, if you have unsaved document, you can choose not to save it. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go to current, so I can go to here. If you already have a page open, how do you create a new page? Control doc. See above doc how it says plus page? Okay. So where do we have to go to add our data? This is going to be a little...
4.
Okay, I will say this. A lot of students get distracted by 5. 5 is where you actually create graphs of data. To enter the data, you do go to 4. List and spreadsheets is what we talked about yesterday to create the data. before I enter my data, I'm going to go to the top of that column, and I'm going to type out the variable, right? So what is the top of the column under activity 3.1? No. Page M4-37, we should be looking at this page, right? Activity 3.1. So what's at the top of that column? Maria. Now I'm literally going to title it Maria. You have a keyboard at the bottom of that calculator. Once I type in Maria, I'm going to type in all of the data values. Go back through after you're done to check and make sure that you have all the data values in there. Don't do Heidi's yet, just do Maria's. And again, go back through and check to make sure you did it correctly. What's your question? You go to the top of the column, type in their name. You type in, I'm going to set this here so that you can use the calculator. You're working with Maria's data right now. Yes, Jaden? So just go through and check to make sure they're right. Go to 4, current. Let's just hit the number 4. There you go. Now, that's not what you want right there, because that's inappropriate in my math class. Yes, you did. You need a title, label it at the very top first. Put the name.
And you hate?
He just told me that.
So hit enter from there, so that that value's in there. Check through and make sure you got your data in there correctly. Okay? Ezra, you haven't typed in your data, bud.
Oh.
The rest of this is going to be very confusing. You don't have it in there. All right. Who needs me to hold on the next part, or do we have our data in? Thomas was wrong. Okay. All right, from here, all right, I went through it once yesterday. Does anyone remember what button we're going to press to be able to analyze the data?
Menu.
You always press menu to access the operations on this calculator. I don't know why I thought that door was open, but I did. So I'm going to go to menu. From there, it's statistics. Notice the mean symbol next to statistics. Hey, Jordan, can you please get your hood off your head? Thank you, sir. Okay, from there, stat calculations. We're going to do statistical calculations, and you want one variable stats. All right? Don't worry about all the other stuff. You'll learn about some of it later. But one variable statistics. How many lists do you have?
15.
Nope, you went to stat test. We want stat calculations, not stat test. Number 1.
Our first thing and
Say again.
Our first thing and
15.
You have one list. Number of list is 1. Okay, the issue is because you're actually clicked inside of that cell, now you can do it. See how you can now do it? So guys, you cannot be clicked inside of a cell, otherwise it'll gray it all out and not let it work. One variable statistics, bud. There you go. You got one list there. And stat calculation. One variable statistics. Okay? Yes. It's all grayed out because if you go to here, you see how you're still inside that cell. Hit enter. Now you can do it. Okay, you have one list. there's two things that you can do under X list. Notice that should remind you that X1 where it says that should remind you of X sub I. You just can't do a subscript. That's your that's your values. So you can either type out the name that you put for the list, which was Maria, or if you click right on the D-pad, what do you see there? Maria. So click on Maria. That is the variable that you're using. And then once you do that, you don't need to do anything else. It's going to put the first result column in B. You just hit enter. Okay, so Maria needs to be there. You hit enter, okay, and there we go. And I'll show you some more details in a second. It's because you're inside of that cell. You have to be out, so it has to be highlighted, but you don't want to see that cursor. Now, it'll work. Okay, good. Yes, Joey?
Mine didn't do it.
It did. See how it says one variable statistics?
But it's not giving me the first one.
What are you talking about?
It's not giving me
Title, one variable statistics. Mean is that. It gives you everything. All right. So, who does not have, so at the top you should see this. Who does not see that? So I need to show them how to get there. Okay? We all got there? So I want you to notice, so eyes up here on this. So what is this first number here?
82.
No, but what does it mean?
It's the mean.
That's the mean, that's the average, right? Notice the calculator will give you the mean. So when we look right here, Miss Webb, right, the spelling bee coach is preparing her class for their first spelling bee scrimmage. She needs to determine which student should be the spelling bee captain. The two top spelling bee student scores are recorded in the table, and she analyzes the scores and calculates the approximate mean and standard deviation, yada, yada, yada. So Maria's average or typical score is what? 82.93 repeating.
How do you get that?
It's in the calculator, bud. You literally had it earlier. I saw it. Go to the top. Nope, keep going all the way to the top. There it is. Right? The mean is 82.93 repeating. Notice, you see this right here? What is 1244? That's the sum of x. Because how do we calculate the mean? It is the sum of x divided by
N minus 1.
So be careful, the mean is only divided by n. The standard deviation is where we get n minus 1. Okay? So, 1244. Don't forget, you can still get to the scratch pad. Underneath the escape button is that little calculator symbol. Press that little calculator symbol under the escape button. Escape is top left. Press the calculator button there below it. Do 1244 divided by, how many samples were there? 15. So do 1244 divided by 15. Make sure you get a decimal. Make sure you get a decimal.
Divided by what?
15. There were 15.
82.9.
Oh, you mean you got that same mean right there? So the calculator did that work for us. You divided by 15. 1244. 1,244. Try that again. Okay. So we should have gotten this mean right here. Anybody recognize any other symbols on this page right now? You should see it on your calculator too.
I only see a scratch.
The sigma x squared.
Oh, that's the sum of x squared. Have we ever added up all the x, just the x squareds? No. But what's the next one? What do you think that S stands for? Say it again. Oh, that S is the standard deviation. So Maria's average score is 82.93 repeating. But what's her typical deviation from that?
10.9835.
That's what that is saying. Her average score in the spelling bee contest is 82.93 repeating, but she has a typical deviation or a standard deviation from that score by 10.98 words. What are your questions about that? Do we see those values there? Now you can scroll through the rest of these. Notice, what does it give us right here? N is 15. By the way, don't worry about this one here. You don't need that. That 10.6111, that's something else. But what is the next thing in here?
Median.
No, right below the, well, so, sorry, yeah, what is N again? That's the number of values. That's the sample size is another way to say it. What's right below that though? Minimum. So we have a minimum of what score? 67. What's after that?
Q1.
Oh yeah. Look at that. Q1 is what? 73. After that is the median, which is 81.
There's 93.
Q3 is 93. And the max?
103.
103. Please stop talking and listen. Miss Estel is a student I have shadowing me from the University of Alabama. She'll actually be here next Wednesday. And whenever I'm out, she'll probably be the sub that I have because she actually knows math pretty well and can teach it. She and I looked at y'all's homework the other day and we noticed that a whole lot of us don't know a really important thing. Does anyone remember the name for these 5 numbers?
5 number summary.
That's the 5-number summary. Okay? And what do we need that 5-number summary in order to create?
Box and whisker.
Box and whisker plots. For those of y'all who are like, how do I create a box and whisker plot? It's based on the 5-number summary. Okay, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second, but Jordan, it looks like you had a question.
I had a question about internship. So do you get to like pick who you want, or does it just come random?
Well, I work with a professor at the University of Alabama, and so I usually can get a pretty good intern. But I'm getting a better one this time for sure because during the 2 to 3 weeks I'm out when my son Alex is born, she's going to be here 2 or 3 days a week to help y'all so that you don't get behind. And I'm going to have other plans and stuff, so I want to make sure that your learning is valued even if I'm out because I just had a newborn son. Yes, Jamie? So, for those of y'all who are struggling with box and whisker plots, I will say this, on the understanding check, you need to be able to explain where the 5-number summary comes from. You need to be able to tell me how you got the minimum, how you got the median, all that kind of stuff, right? Don't forget that I am looking for your justification. But once you have that 5-number summary, what's the lowest value? 67. Largest value is 103. What's a scale that I could go? Well, first off, what number could I start with for the low end? 67, sure, but that seems like an odd number to start with. Maybe 65, and instead of going to 103, go all the way up to 105? What would be a good scale to go from 65 to 105? Scale. 10s or maybe, I would probably go by 5s. The smaller the interval, the more accurate it can be. And it's really not terrible. Look, just take the time, 65, 70, 75. Right, I'm starting at that 65 because that's below 67. Nope. 80, 85, 90, 95, 100, and 105. Okay? So, my minimum score was what again? 67.
Got it.
So I need to draw a line about 67. That's the beginning of the box and whisker plot, a vertical line there. And then I draw a horizontal line until what number? 73. Q1. Remember, the first quartile starts the what? The box. So I start a box right here. Where does that box end? At 93. Is there anything that I need to put inside of that box? not a point, but a line at 81. And then
93.
and I need to go out to 103.
Do we draw this on our paper?
Well, we're just going through this right now to help you prepare for the understanding check. We'll do this more later. So here's the thing. One, I'm not done with a graph like this. What is missing from this graph?
The labels?
Okay, when you say labels, what do you mean? Okay, a title. So what are these numbers representing? Maria's.
Spelling bee, spelling scores.
So spelling scores. That's what we're looking at. So Maria's spelling scores are right here. That's it. Now, if I were to ask you to analyze this data, what 4 things do you need to talk about? Okay, the mean is a measure of center. And I would not talk about a mean from a box plot. Median is the measure of center we'd want to use here. Now, since it's, what shape is this? Roughly symmetrical. Because it's roughly symmetrical, could I use mean? Yes? Hello? Okay. Yep, fine. Joey? Okay. Go, 1, grow up. 2, Joey, that's disrespectful. I've never disrespected you in my class. Don't play that with me. And I get a hold of yourself. Alright. So we would want to talk about median since it's in a box plot. Because it's symmetrical, yes, we could talk about the mean. What does that U stand for? Unusual aspects. The S, first S is the shape. Notice I already said the shape that is roughly symmetrical. You could say it's slightly skewed which direction? To the right, but I would probably say it's closer to roughly symmetrical. Right? It's a little skewed to the right, but not by much. Okay? And then what's the S stand for? The second S?
Spread.
Spread. What would be the spread that I use here?
93.
There's 2 different measures of spread. The standard deviation and IQR. Because it's symmetrical or roughly symmetrical, I could use standard deviation, which is already there. But because I have a box plot, I'm going to use IQR. Well, remember, it's going to be the higher minus the lower, but the higher what? Hold on a second.
So when you drop plots, like this shape, is the spread IQR?
Well, spread is IQR if you're dealing with medians. Okay? Spread is standard deviation when you're dealing with mean. That's how we measure spread. But it doesn't matter whether you have a dot plot, a histogram, a box plot, any of that stuff. Okay? Alright, so the IQR is, and someone already said it, the 3rd quartile minus the 1st quartile, which gives me an IQR of 20. Which, remember, what that means is, what percent of my data is within 20 units? 50%, right? It's from Q1 to Q3. That's half my data there. Okay? And the last thing I'm going to talk about, the only thing I haven't discussed yet is histogram, but the last thing I'm going to talk about before the understanding check is this. How can I use that IQR to determine if there's an outlier? So we need to get the upper fence, but how do we find an upper fence? Good thing I talked about this before the understanding check then. Y'all are supposed to study. It is almost all in lesson 2.
What was the 3 plus?
And then it'll be that 50. That's IQR.
Excuse me, hold on, Peyton, what were you asking?
I was looking at
So the range is from the minimum to the maximum. But remember, interquartile range is the range between the quartiles. Okay? So the IQR, the interquartile range, is the range between the quartiles. Okay? So to determine if there's an outlier, it needs to be 1.5 times the IQR above the third quartile. But for a lower outlier, for a lower fence, it would be, but am I going to subtract from Q3 this time? Right, I'm going to use that lower quartile and take away 1.5 times the IQR. No, you need to remember that. I'm literally going over it right now. No, I'm not going to keep that on the board. You got a brain, use it. So notice Q3 is 93 plus 1.5 times 20 would give me 123. Are any data values above 123? So is there an upper outlier? No. Right? And there wouldn't be any lower outliers if you check it as well. Yes, sir?
How did you get what for multiplication for it?
Because we already calculated the IQR over here.
Oh.
Remember, that stands for IQR, so I need to calculate that IQR. Okay? Again, please hear me clearly on this. I will need you to show me those values and like how you can get them by hand. But if you can't get those values by hand, what can you use? The calculator. Will you be able to earn as high of a score? No, because you're not showing me as much evidence of your understanding, but it's still better than nothing. No one should have anything blank on this understanding check. Even if you use the calculator, you need to tell me that so it doesn't just look like gibberish on a page. Justify the answers you come up with. The last thing with histogram, don't forget, what does a histogram look like?
Rectangles.
It looks like a bar chart.
It looks like a bar chart,
But it's connected.
but the bars are connected. So what you might want to do is, well, not might want to do, you want to create your bins, and then how high the histogram goes is based on the frequency. So for a histogram, you need frequency on the y-axis. You still need to title it. But how many data values are there between, let's just go 65 to 75. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, there's 4 data values between 65 and 75. So how high would the bar go? So, boom. So you can do a dot plot for sure here, right? I'm just pointing out that's how you make the histogram. Will dot plot be on the understanding check? Yes. Because when would you use a dot plot? If it's a small amount of data, we want to use a dot plot, right? When would you want to use a histogram? Not a histogram.
Oh, that's a box.
Yeah, we use box and whisker plot when we're trying to compare. But notice how we can show 4 data points with just a single bar? We can use a histogram when there's a whole lot of data. Right? Dot plots, great when it's small amount of data. Histograms when it's large amounts of data. But I will tell you this right here and right now. I need a show of hands. How many of you actually studied for this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When I got 20-something students in class, only 5 of us take the time to study. That might hurt our ability to be successful on the understanding check. You can't be successful in my class without studying, and I need you to hear from me very clearly on this. You need to study even before an understanding check comes up. You need to do the homework, you need to review the things studied, because we've really only gone over 2 whole lessons after that last understanding check. 2 lessons. There's a lot in those lessons though, and if you don't take time to, with that information, it's hard to learn it well. So, here is, I have it somewhere, the understanding check. Because that took me longer than planned, you will have the rest of the block to do this understanding check. Clear your desk completely, except for a calculator, and you may have the rubric out that I use to score. You may keep out the rubric, and you may have a calculator. So that purple rubric. No, I didn't get to actually put it on this morning. I was really busy. You can if you want to. Let me check and make sure there's something in there. Sure. Excuse me. Why are we not silent and work on the understanding check? Walk down to that room really quickly. Just leave that there. See if there's something in there. Okay. And do you want to be very clear about this? I always hear students say, I didn't know I had to explain it. If it's an assessment for me, you have to explain it. Justify your responses. Either show work or even use your words to justify your responses. Everything. Even if there's multiple choice. Huh? She wasn't? Okay, hold on a second. I'm just emailing somebody. Why do you guys take this out? We're in an understanding check. Clear your desk off. Oh, sorry.
Nathan.
Nathan.
What do I do with this?
Just hold on to it for a second.
You're not gonna be long.
Oh,
Go ahead, leave it on your
3
desk.
seconds. Come on, work on the understanding check. It ain't funny. Get to work.